Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our buddy read of Mr. Scarborough's Family by Anthony Trollope. We have just recently, in the last chapter, been brought up to speed on Captain Montjoy Scarborough, who has gambled himself out of a pretty rich inheritance. He's gambled himself out of respectable society, and he is in Monte Carlo on a winning streak, but being followed by one of his moneylenders, and winning streaks are going to end. When he's in Monte Carlo, he doesn't look anything like himself. He looks seedy. His clothing is run down. His florid soldier mustachios are gone. And he seems like a man with not a friend in the world. Someone who can wander to Monte Carlo and maybe on to Tibet without anyone caring, except the people to whom he owes money. But although Montjoy Scarborough doesn't have a friend in the world, he does have at least one champion in the world. And that is Mrs. Montjoy, the mother of Florence Montjoy, the young woman that the captain more or less assumed he would marry one day. Mrs. Montjoy, back in Cheltenham, in the quiet preserves of the countryside, simply refuses to understand what's happened to that arrangement. As far as she's concerned, the property, the rich property that Scarborough was going to inherit, Tretton Park, is entailed on him. And entails can't be broken. Nothing can be done about that. She knows the story of what Montjoy's father has done. Montjoy's father has broken the entail by providing his lawyer, and by osmosis the world, with documentary proof that Montjoy is illegitimate, and that therefore he will not inherit anything and didn't have any right to raise any money in expectation that he would. Mrs. Montjoy refuses to understand that. As far as she's concerned, her daughter Florence is going to marry her first cousin, Montjoy, as soon as, I guess, old Mr. Scarborough dies. And Mrs. Montjoy does not like anything that threatens the serenity of those plans. And the main thing that does is a wavy-haired but weak-lipped young man named Harry Ainsley, who we've met in this book so far, who has troubles of his own. Constable Prodgers would like to arrest him for suspected complicity in the disappearance of Mr. Scarborough, of Captain Scarborough. The police don't like him at all. Suspect that he had something to do with the man's disappearance. Of course, we now know where Captain Scarborough is, but London doesn't know that. Maybe they will soon enough, because that creditor who was at Monte Carlo will certainly make his way back to London and start to make the news known. But Harry Ainsley has his heart set on Florence Montjoy, the very young woman who was unofficially promised to Montjoy Scarborough. And Trollope gives us the strong impression that the feeling is mutual, but Mrs. Montjoy wants none of this. She does not want her plans for her daughter's marriage interfered with. So she makes a plan of her own to go and visit her brother, who is a minister in Brussels, and take Florence along. Go for a month, maybe even longer, away from Harry. Is the key. It's not that she's suddenly urgent to see her brother. It's that she wants to get Florence out of the way of this ardent suitor. So they are getting ready to go. And we can presume, we readers of the book can presume, that the action will decamp to Brussels, at least for part of the book, in the near future. But first, Trollope feels that it's his duty as a novelist, especially a Victorian novelist, to give us some saccharin, some schmaltz. So that's what you have to prepare yourself for in this chapter. We are reading chapter 12 today. It is called Harry Ainsley's Success. Harry Ainsley, a day or two after he had left Tretton, went down to Cheltenham, for he had received an invitation to a dance there, and with the invitation an intimation that Florence Montjoy was to be at the dance. If I were to declare that the dance had been given and Florence asked to it merely as an act of friendship to Harry, it would perhaps be thought that modern friendship is seldom carried to so great a length. But it was undoubtedly a fact that Mrs. Armitage, who gave the dance, was a great friend and admirer of Harry's, and that Mr. Armitage was a special chum. Let not, however, any reader suppose that Florence was in the secret. She was in on it. She knew it. She wasn't conniving herself. That would make her interesting. God forbid her to be interesting. I promise you, when it comes to female characters, help is on the way. Mrs. Armitage had thought it best to keep her in the dark as to the person asked to meet her. As to my going to Montpelier Place, Harry said once to Mrs. Armitage, I might as well knock on a prison door, because Mrs. Mountjoy lived at Montpelier Place, and he knows he's not welcome there anymore. I think we could perhaps manage that for you, Mrs. Armitage had replied, and she had managed it. Is she coming? Harry said to Mrs. Armitage in an anxious whisper as he entered the room. She has been here this half hour, if you had taken the trouble to leave your cigars and come and meet her. She has not gone? Said Harry, almost awestruck at the idea. No, she is sitting like Patience on a monument, smiling at grief in the room inside. That's a quote. There's no grief in this chapter. She has got horrible news to tell you. Oh, heavens, what news? I suppose she will tell you, though she has not been communicative to me in regard to your Royal Highness. The news is simply that her mother is going to take her to Brussels, and that she is to live for a while amidst the ambassadorial splendors with Sir Magnus and his wife. So there's a little bit of sass in Mrs. Armitage. It makes you wish that we could maybe know her a little better. By retiring from the world, Mrs. Mountjoy had not intended to include such slight social relaxations as Mrs. Armitage's party, for Harry, on turning round, encountered her talking to another Cheltenham lady. He greeted her in his pleasantest smile, to which Mrs. Mountjoy did not respond quite so sweetly. She had ever greatly feared Harry Annesley, and had today heard a story very much, as she thought, to his discredit. What could that story be, and who did she hear it from? Is your daughter here? Asked Harry, with well-trained hypocrisy. Mrs. Mountjoy could not but acknowledge that her daughter was in the room, and then Harry passed on in pursuit of his quarry. Oh, Mr. Annesley, how did you come to Cheltenham? As soon as I heard that Mrs. Armitage was going to have a party, I began to think of coming immediately. Then, as an idea for the first time shot through Florence's mind, that her friend Mrs. Armitage was a woman fond of intrigue. Florence realizes that she's been set up. What dances have you disengaged? I have something that I must tell you tonight. You don't mean to say that you will not give me one dance. The meaning here is that without a chaperone, the only time that these two young people can actually talk is during a dance. And young ladies keep a little book. They keep a little track of which gentleman is promised which dance in the course of the night. And Harry is wondering how many free dances she has, because they have to talk. He doesn't see how he's going to be able to do that with her mother watching every minute. This was merely a lover's anxious doubt on his part, because Florence had not at once replied to him. I am told that you are going away to Brussels. Mamma is going to visit her brother-in-law. And you with her? Of course I will go with Mamma. All this had been said apart, while a fair-haired, lackadaisical young gentleman was standing twiddling his thumbs, waiting to dance with Florence. At last the little book from her waist was brought forth, and Harry's name was duly inscribed. The next dance was a quadrille, and he saw that the space after that was also vacant, so he boldly wrote down his name for both. I almost think that Florence must have suspected that Harry Annesley was to be there that night, or why should two places have been kept vacant? Because she's very popular on the dance floor. And now what is this? What is this, he began, about your going to Brussels? Mamma's brother is minister there, and we are just going on a visit. But why now? I am sure there is some special cause. Florence would not say that there was no special cause, so she could only repeat her assertion that they certainly were going to Brussels. She herself was well aware that she was not to be taken out of Harry's way, and that something was to be expected to occur during this short month of her absence which might be detrimental to him, and to her also. But this she could not tell, nor did she like to say that the plea given by her mother was the general state of the Scarborough affairs. She did not wish to declare to this lover that the other lover was nothing to her. And how long will you be away? Said Harry. We shall be a month with Sir Magnus, but Mamma is talking of going onwards after that to the Italian lakes. Good heavens, you will not be back, I suppose, till ever so much after Christmas. I cannot tell. Nothing has as yet been settled. I do not know that I ought to tell you anything about it. Harry at this moment looked up and caught the eye of Mrs. Mountjoy as she was standing in the doorway opposite, Mrs. Mountjoy certainly looked as though no special communication as to Florence's future movements ought to be made to Harry Ainsley. Then, however, it came to his turn to dance, and he had a moment allowed to him to collect his thoughts. By nothing that he could do or say could he prevent her going, and he could only use the present moment to the best purpose in his power. He bethought himself then that he had never received from her a word of encouragement, and that such a word, if ever it be spoken, should be forthcoming that night. What might not happen to a girl who was passing the balmy Christmas months amid the sweet shallows of an Italian lake? Harry's idea of an Italian lake were, in truth, at present somewhat vague, but future months were, to his thinking, interminable. The present moment only was his own. The dance was now finished. "Come and take a walk," said Harry. "I think I will go to Mamma," Florence had said, had seen her mother's eyes fixed upon her. "Oh, come, that won't do at all," said Harry, who already had got her by the hand within his arm. "A fellow is always entitled to 5 minutes, and then I am down for the next waltz." "Oh, no." "But I am, and you can't get out of it now." "Oh, Florence, will you answer me one question? One question? I asked it to you before, and you did not vouchsafe me an answer." "You asked me no questions," said Florence, who remembered to the last syllable every word that had been said to her on that occasion. "Did I not? I'm sure you knew what it was that I intended to ask." Florence could not but think that this was quite another thing. "Oh, Florence, can you love me?" Had she given her ears for it, she could not have told him the truth then on the spur of the moment. Her mother's eye was, she knew, watching her through the doorway, all the way across the other room. And yet, had her mother asked her, she would have answered boldly that she did love Harry Ainsley, and intended to love him for ever and ever, with all her heart. I did warn you of sap. Fortunately, there's nothing else in this chapter. It's just sap. And she would have gone further if cross-questioned, and had declared that she regarded him already as her lord and master. But now she had not a word to say to him. All she knew was that he had now pledged himself to her, and that she intended to keep him to his pledge. "May I not have one word?" he said. "One word?" What could he want with a word more? Thought Florence. Her silence was now as good as any speech. It is actually true. If a young gentleman says something like this to her, and she's silent, silence gives consent. Her role otherwise would be like that lily-livered young man who was waiting for a dance with her. If he had said this, she would immediately have shot him down. Silence means something here. It's just not all that a hot-blooded, wavy-lipped young man like Harry wants. But as he did want more, she would, after her own way, reply to him. So there came upon his arm the slightest possible sense of pressure from those sweet fingers, and Harry Ainsley was on a sudden carried up among the azure-tinted clouds into the furthest heaven of happiness. After a moment he stood still, and passed his fingers through his hair, and waved his head as a god might do. She had now made to him a solemn promise, than which no words could be more binding. "Oh, Florence," he exclaimed, "I must have you alone with me for one moment." And what could he want her alone for any moment? Thought Florence. There was her mother still looking at them, but for her Harry did not care one straw. Nor did he hate those bright Italian lakes with nearly so strong a feeling of abhorrence. "Florence, you are now all my own." There came almost another slightest pressure, slight, but so eloquent, from those fingers. She's squeezing his arm, rather than saying anything to him. "I hate dancing. How is a fellow to dance now? I shall run against everybody. I can see no one. I should be sure to make a fool of myself. No, I don't want to dance even with you. No, certainly not. Let you dance with somebody else, and you engage to me? Well, if I must, of course I must. I declare, Florence, you have not spoken a single word to me, though there is so much that you must have to say. What have you got to say? What a question to ask! You must tell me. Oh, you know what you have got to tell me. The sound of it all will be the sweetest music a man can possibly hear." "You know it all, Harry," she whispered. "But I want to hear it. Oh, Florence, Florence, I do not think you can understand how completely I am beyond myself with joy. I cannot dance again. I will not. Oh, my wife, my wife!" "Hush," said Florence, afraid that the very walls might hear the sound of Harry's words. "What does it signify, though all the world knew it?" "Oh, yes." I should have been so fortunate. That is what I cannot understand. Poor Mountjoy. I do feel for him, that he should have had the start of me so long, and have done nothing." Nothing, whispered Florence. And I have done everything. I am so proud of myself that I think I must look almost like a hero. They had now got to the extremity of the room near an open window, and Florence found that she was able to say one word. You are my hero. All right, Tony. That was sweet. The sound of this nearly drove him mad with joy. He forgot all his troubles, Prodgers the policeman, Augustus Scarborough, and that fellow whom he hated so much, Septimus Jones. What were they all to him now? He had set his mind upon one thing of value, and he had got it. Florence had promised to be his, and he was sure that she would never break her word. But he felt that for the full enjoyment of his triumph, he must be alone somewhere with Florence for 5 minutes, probably to kiss her. You humans and your kissing. She had not actually explained to himself why, but he knew that he wished to be alone with her. At present there was no prospect of any such 5 minutes, but he must say something in preparation of some future 5 minutes at the time to come. Perhaps it might be tomorrow, though he did not at present see how that might be possible, for Mrs. Mountjoy, he knew, would shut her door against him. And Mrs. Mountjoy was already prowling round the room after her daughter. Harry saw her as he got Florence to an opposite door, and there for a moment escaped with her. And now, he said, how am I to manage to see you before you go to Brussels? I do not know that you can see me. Do you mean that you are to be shut up, and that I am to not be allowed to approach you? I do mean it. Mamma is, of course, attached to her nephew, meaning Mountjoy. What, after all that's passed? Why not? Is he to blame for what his father has done? No, Mountjoy is not to blame for what his father has done, but he's to blame for thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, in gambling debts. He's to blame for that. Harry felt that he could not press the case against Captain Scarborough without some want of generosity, and though he had told Florence once about that dreadful midnight meeting, he could say nothing further on that subject. Of course, Mamma thinks I'm foolish. But why? He asked. Because she doesn't see with my eyes, Harry. We need not say anything more about it at present. It is so, and therefore I am to go to Brussels. You have made this opportunity for yourself before I start. Perhaps I've been foolish to be taken off my guard. Don't say that, Florence. I shall think so, unless you can be discreet. Harry, you will have to wait. You will remember that we must wait, but I shall not change. Nor I. I think not, because I trust you. Here is Mamma, and now I must leave you, but I shall tell Mamma everything before I go to bed. Then Mrs. Mountjoy came up and took Florence away with a few words of most disdainful greeting to Harry Ainsley. When Florence had gone, Harry felt as though the sun and moon and stars had all set, and an absolute darkness reigned through the rooms. He might as well escape into the street, where there was no one but the police to watch him, as he threw up his hat into the air in his exultation. But before he did so, he had to pass by Mrs. Armitage and thank her for all her kindness, for he was aware how much she had done for him in his present circumstances. Oh, Mrs. Armitage, I am so obliged to you. No fellow has ever been so obliged to a friend before. How has it gone off? For Mrs. Mountjoy has taken Florence home. Oh, yes, she has taken her away, but she hasn't shut the stable door till the steed has been stolen. Lovely. The steed has been stolen? Yes, I think so. I do think so. And that poor man who has disappeared is nowhere. Men who disappear never are anywhere. But I do flatter myself that if he had held his ground and kept his property, the result would have been the same. I dare say. Don't suppose, Mrs. Armitage, that I am taking any pride of myself. Why on earth Florence should have taken a fancy to such a fellow as I am, I cannot imagine. Oh, no, not in the least. It is all very well for you to laugh, Mrs. Armitage, but as I have thought of it all, I have sometimes been in despair. What does her joke mean? If we read between the lines here, we get the impression that Harry Ainsley is a little vain, even though we've been told that he's not. But now you are in despair. No, indeed. Just now I am triumphant. I have thought so often that I was a fool to love her because everything was so much against me. I have wondered that you continued. It always seemed to me that there wasn't a ghost of a chance for you. Mr. Armitage bade me give it all up because he was sure you would never do any good. I don't care how much you laugh at me, Mrs. Armitage. Let those laugh who win. Then he rushed out into the Paragon and absolutely did throw his hat up in the air in triumph. All right, well, that wasn't so bad. That scene had to happen. So things have changed just a tiny bit. Florence has given Harry her assurance that she will never change in her devotion to him. Love for him. And we have been told, Harry hasn't been told this, but we have been told that she already considers him her husband. Okay. So that's done now, and there's no wondering about that. So she's still going away to Brussels. Is she going to be tempted in Brussels? Is Harry going to encounter trouble while he's back home? We shall see. We'll move on to the next chapter next time. So I'll wrap this up for now. I'll see you all then. Thank you, BookTube.